It's time for some Nevada straight talk. This is a very, very serious issue. SJR15 creates uncertainty. And it's unfortunately a domino progression of uncertainty.
It is time for some straight talk on mining and taxes, and we'll have some right now on the agenda.
Nevada's premier source for political commentary. Informed opinions about the issues affecting you. From the right, Elizabeth Crum. From the left, Hugh Jackson. This is The Agenda.
Happy Friday. I'm Hugh Jackson, the Agenda's commentator from the left.
And I'm Elizabeth Crum, your commentator from the right.
Now, first today, a housekeeping item from the Department of Best Laid Plans. We had planned to discuss a possible lawsuit designed to equalize and increase education funding in Nevada. We're going to push that discussion back to Monday. As for today's program, you may have noticed that mining industry lobbyists spent much of yesterday warning everyone that there is a lot of bad information out there. Bad information? Mining lobbyists should know. We'll unpack some of theirs in a few minutes. Also, News 3's Marissa Mike has been working on a series of reports on the patient dumping scandal, and she will be here with the latest on that unsettling story. And one other housekeeping item. How many days are left in the 2013 session of the Nevada legislature? According to the little box you see at the bottom of your screen, it's 31. So all you industry lobbyists who haven't got all your goodies and breaks and subsidies at the expense of the public good, you better get cracking. Time's a-wasting.
But first, we want to talk today about that Assembly Committee hearing on the Senate Joint Resolution 15, which would end the halcyon days the Nevada mining industry has long enjoyed. As all astute Agenda viewers already know, the Nevada Constitution limits taxation on mining corporations to just net proceeds. People often ask me how this came to be. In 1863, 39 Nevada delegates drafted the state constitution. Voters rejected it in part because the taxation of mines was deemed too unfavorable to mine owners and their employers and mining communities, all of whom made up a pretty large percentage of the total population of the territory at that time. In an odd and unprecedented act, Congress took the issue of the Constitution up, passed an enabling act, and that paved the way to rapid validation by President Lincoln once Nevada's Constitution was to be transmitted. This was done because Nevada's Republican congressional votes were needed and desperately wanted when that vote to abolish slavery came around, as well as in the upcoming presidential election. So a second Constitution was drafted, including language from the Congressional Enabling Act that required slavery to be outlawed, that also took all undistributed public lands and retained them for the federal government, said that land could never be taxed by the state, so that was a pretty nice deal for the feds. But in addition, out of fear of opposition of the Constitution from the mine owners again, a provision stating that only the net proceeds of mines would be taxed was included in the document. Nevada voters overwhelmingly approved it. The president signed it a few days later. That was President Lincoln. And 8 days later, Nevada voted Republican in that presidential race, as well as other legislative elections. That is how one of the least populated territories with the least amount of economic activity, except for mining of course, became a state with super special protections for that industry that still stand today.
Thank you, Professor Crum, for that short narrative of the creation of the Nevada Constitution. I'm going to pick up the amendment with respect to mining that were added to the Constitution in 1989, a little later in the program. But you mentioned the Assembly Taxation Committee yesterday. Of course, they're hearing this amendment to take mining's language out of the Constitution. No action yesterday. That's just the way their rules work. They will act on this. Everyone expects this to pass. There were a couple of things that were interesting about the Taxation Committee yesterday. The first one was that throughout this entire process, and really going back to 2009 when this amendment first came up the first time, mining said, well, we're neutral. We don't have a position on this. Gosh, it looks like if this passes, we might even pay less money. Yesterday, they shed that facade, dropped the ruse, and came out and said, we're against this, this is terrible, and went forward and tried to explain why to kill it. So that was an interesting development.
It was. They did come out swinging, and in the process of doing so, because of some of the rhetoric that was presented before that committee, Speaker Marilyn Kirkpatrick got a little bit miffed. She didn't take too kindly to some of what was being being said, or at least the tone, and I thought it was pretty interesting what she said. Let's take a look at that real quick.
This is not about one industry over another. This is about policy. This is about doing what's best for the state. So I'm a little bit trying to keep my composure. It's a little bit hard to swallow sometimes that we don't do anything to help in the rest of the state.
What she was referring to there was this ongoing battle between Northern Nevada and Southern Nevada over funding, who puts what into the state coffers and who gets what back out. So that was kind of the subtext of what she was talking about there, because she's a Southern Nevada lawmaker. As
I remember that portion of the hearing, and because I am a dork, I watched the hearing. I always watch mining hearings. It was, I believe, an economic development director, economic diversification guy from, might have been Ely or Elko, I can't remember which. But effectively what he said was that rural counties were subsidizing the South, that the North was subsidizing the South. Many people followed him to point out the math. William Horn among them, a Southern Nevada representative, pointing out, look, that's not the case at all, basically had him back down on this. But yeah, Kirkpatrick said, oh, well, now you're making it personal. The whole culture, and when you watched some of the other folks from Northern Nevada, and you see this with some of the mining lobbyists themselves, which are almost, well, the ones that we see are from Northern Nevada. There is that kind of, oh, Southern Nevada, you're not really Nevada type of approach, and I can see how it gets under legislative skin.
It does, and there's some territorialism that goes on there on the part of the North, and it is a little bit unfair because 70% of the population does live down here. We do put an awful lot of our taxpayer dollars into those state coffers. All right, coming up next, we're going to continue to talk about this and take a look at some of the mining lobbies' arguments against SJR15 and changing tax policy on that industry in general, so stay with us.
Okay, we're back. Yesterday's legislative hearing on mining taxes was like so many other hearings on the issue I've watched or testified at over the years. Mining lobbyists rhetorically wander off into the high weeds, legislators follow them, and the nub of the issue at hand is left behind somewhere, never really addressed. The preferred high weed habitat of mining lobbyist Jim Wadhams yesterday was this Byzantine argument that if you take mining out of the Constitution, then they'll actually pay less taxes because a higher property tax rate will no longer apply to them, and blah, 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 blah. The real argument that they're making when they say that, and I'm sorry, I'm following Wadhams off into the weeds, and I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm going to anyway. The real argument that they're making when they say that, and it's an argument that they never actually come out and explicitly say, is that the legislature can't tax gold production in any possible way except the way that it is taxed right now. That even if you take mining out of the Constitution, legislators cannot establish a new production tax or a severance tax, because doing so would somehow violate the time-space continuum or something. At some point yesterday, some legislator should have interrupted Wadhams and asked him directly, hey, wait a minute, Wadhams, are you saying if we take you out of the Constitution, we can't enact some new kind of tax on gold? Wadhams doesn't want to answer that direct question, because if he answered it honestly, it would undermine the whole squirrely, gosh, we'll pay even less if you take us out of the Constitution argument. Wadhams was also on Ralston Reports last night. John Ralston came very close, closer than the legislators did, to getting at the issue at hand. Watch Wadhams' reaction. It's clearly a question he doesn't want to hear or answer.
What are the taxes that if this is taken out of the Constitution?
You can't take property out of the Constitution.
But the resolution that will go before voters does not take property out of the Constitution. It takes language out of the Constitution that says we can only tax gold as property. Specifically, Article 10, Section 5 of the Nevada Constitution was amended in 1989 not only to set the rate and form of the mining tax, but also to state that, quote, no other tax may be imposed upon a mineral or its proceeds. That's the language that will be removed from the Constitution if voters pass the mining tax amendment in 2014. If that language wasn't so important, mining would not have insisted that it be inserted into the Nevada Constitution in the first place. Now, those of you who have been following this issue no doubt feel I have been belaboring the obvious. But Wadhams and other mining lobbyists are absolutely correct about one thing. There is a lot of misinformation surrounding the mining tax debate. So I just wanted to clear up any confusion about exactly what it is that mining is afraid of. Because once you understand that, you understand that when Wadhams says the state and local governments will lose money if mining is taken out of the Constitution, that is an irrelevant distraction.
Interesting points, and I think you went right to it. I haven't heard it argued quite that way before. You're right, Ralston did kind of try to get at it last night, which is, and it is a preposterous premise, right? I mean, if that language comes out, there's 7 ways to heaven that we can tax mining if we so choose. And, you know, they're already subject to business taxes on the books, obviously, but the legislature can do anything it wants once this gets past the voters.
No matter what you do, no matter what you propose with these guys, they always come back and say, no, you can't do it. It can't be done. And their whole argument, their whole legislative agenda, if you will, is premised on the idea that, no, lawmakers can do nothing. There is nothing you can do to tax us more.
Here's another thing that's been irking me that I keep hearing, and I think it's kind of interesting that no lawmakers have yet raised this issue either. You know, when mining's up there making these arguments that I presume they've been making since 1864 in some way, shape, or form, every single time this issue has ever come up, they're protecting what got them where they are in the first place, which in my mind is crony capitalism left over from 1864, when the entire state, including those who were running it, agreed that they were going to protect this industry because that's where their bread and butter was. And so they agreed to, in the interest of moving things quickly along and not having any opposition, they threw this into the Constitution. But it's decades and decades and decades later now. We have all kinds of industries that drive revenue here in the state. It's not just all about mining anymore, so it's outdated.
There's one other piece. I don't want to do this while we have time. There's one other piece of misinformation that the mining industry was throwing around yesterday, and here's Wadhams. We have this clip of Wadhams at the legislature appealing to what I like to call the certainty fairy.
We think this resolution is not only a bad idea, it's bad policy, and will have a dramatic impact on this segment of Nevada's economy and ultimately the entire state. If it does nothing else, it will inject uncertainty in the investors, and that will tend to stop exploration and development.
I want to just touch on this very briefly. If investors have uncertainty about the mining industry, it is because of the price of gold. That is the key thing that they're uncertain about. They also, though, have some uncertainty about, frankly, the competence of the management of these companies, which have unloaded billions and billions of dollars on boondoggles around the world over the last 2 or 3 years. And this is why Barrick, in particular, when it met with its shareholders earlier this year, specifically said, okay, we're going back to Nevada. We're done playing around. There's a lot of uncertainty out there, but it has nothing to do with taxes in Nevada.
A final point on that subject, even if we tax mining at, let's say, 10% instead of 5%, extracting gold in Nevada is still going to be cheaper than anywhere else on the planet, and that is certain.
Yeah. All right.